Hi guys, this is what if Naruto learned the hiraishin. I will be posting more, so stay tuned. Let's get started. Ka-san. Kushina looked up quizzically from the dishes she was cleaning, looking around her for the source of the call. Ka-san. She looked around again, only this time a young boy slid into the kitchen, his bare feet slapping pointedly against the tiled floor. The tall red-haired woman chuckled at her son's antics before putting down the bowl she had been wiping. "What is it, Naruto-chan?" The small boy beamed up at his mother, his foxy smile practically glowing. Kushina smiled warmly at her son, bending down with some difficulty to gently stroke his whiskered cheeks. "Toussaint is hiding again." Kushina chuckled more loudly this time as she struggled to stand up straight again, using the counter to pull herself up. Naruto just stared strangely at his mother, walking up to her and placing his small hands on her large round belly. "Ka-san, when is Miyamoto going to be finished cooking?" Kushina just laughed again, somewhat regretting letting Minato explain to Naruto why she had been slowly getting larger in the past months. "A few more weeks." Naruto the redhead just laughed, already anticipating the fun he would have with his sibling. How does she fit in there if Ka-san already has a fox in her tummy? Kushina sighed, another thing she regretted Naruto being told about. "You know, we'll tell you when you're older. Now come on, if Toussaint is hiding, what do we do?" Naruto groaned, her lack of explanation annoying him, but quickly covered it up behind a beaming smile, letting his brow crinkle cutely in thought. "We find him. But Toussaint's using the hiraishin. I think that's cheating." Kushina just raised an eyebrow as she looked around, using her senses to try and locate her wayward husband. "Really? Well, I think you're right, Naruto-chan, that is cheating." Naruto just giggled as he knew what was coming next. Kushina quickly raised her arm and smiled down at her son, and cheaters need to be caught. Suddenly a large golden chain shot out of the woman's palm, darting through the various rooms of the small two-story house the family lived in. It snaked about, coiling around the rooms until it sneaked up behind an unsuspecting blonde man in one of the upper rooms. Before Minato knew what was going on, he suddenly found himself completely ensnared by the same large glowing chain, completely immobilized as it carried him through the house. He came to a floating rest in front of his laughing son and amused wife. He tried to keep a stern face, but he couldn't stop his own smirk from breaking through. "Now Naruto, I didn't think you would bring your mother into this. It was supposed to be a fair game." The 6-year-old just shook his head furiously in that way only young children could. "Nah. When I go to the academy, I'm going to be a shinobi, and a shinobi has to use every advantage to win." Minato just chuckled as his wife finally released him from her special chains, rubbing his wrists where they had been secured just a little too tightly. "Well, at least you're right about that." He bent down and tousled his son's spiky red hair, the perfect mix between his own and Kushina's, annoying him appropriately. But what's even more important than that? Naruto once again entered his adorable thinking pose that had literally had women drop their groceries so they could cry out kawaii. Teamwork and always sticking by your comrades. Minato just nodded with that same warm smile on his face as he patted his son's hair again, much to the boy's chagrin. "Right." He stood up again, giving a soft kiss to his wife as his son turned away in embarrassment of the loving action. "Ah, Toussaint, Ka-san, why do you have to do that around me?" Both parents just laughed as they stared at their son with bemusement. Kushina especially stared at the young boy critically, so like she had been when she was that age, yet in every other aspect he was his father's son. She was just happy he had inherited the Uzumaki hair, or people would never believe he was her son. "Now Naruto-chan, one day you'll find a girl you like and you'll be doing the exact same things with her." She bent down again, this time helped by her husband as she wrapped up her son in a hug. "Then you can have your own family." Naruto just nodded warily. His mother was always stressing the importance of family. "Yeah, I just wish you didn't have to do all the yucky stuff in between." Minato laughed at that as he helped Kushina up onto her feet again, enjoying his son's naivety and innocence. "Ah, but Naruto, that's the best part. To prove the point, he quickly captured Kushina's lips in another searing kiss, once again to Naruto's embarrassment and annoyance. He blushed and ran out of the room, yelling annoyances and various amusing things that only made the two adults chuckle. Minato turned back to his wife, or more specifically the lump now very prominently emerging from her shirt. "And how are my girls today?" Kushina just sighed as she leant back on the counter, cupping her hands under a cumbersome bump. "Very tired, although little Sukuru seems as restless as ever. I swear she's going to be worse than Naruto." Minato nearly blanched at that but recovered well. It wouldn't do for Hokage to panic over a little thing like childbirth again. "Just a few more weeks, Kushi-chan." The woman just sighed and nodded as she returned to wiping up the bowl she had been working on. At least this time she knew what to expect, as opposed to during Naruto's birth when she had practically assaulted her friend Mikoto for answers. Right, Minakuin, then we get to watch Naruto in his first days at the academy." The blonde smiled as he began walking out of the room. "Hey, where are you going?" Minato just chuckled as he went searching for his elusive son. "I'm going to go and train Naruto some more. It won't do for an Namikaze or an Uzumaki to be left behind in the academy." Kushina just smiled sweetly as she turned back around. She winced as she felt the baby kick again and rubbed her swollen stomach soothingly. "Just a few more weeks, Sukuru. Just a few more weeks." 18 days later. Naruto stood in the middle of a clearing, a blindfold over his eyes as he held a single kunai by its handle. Minato watched him with a smirk as he slowly walked around his son, barely making a whisper with his feet. 6 kunai were scattered around the edge of the clearing, each bearing the same 3-pronged design and the same sealing formula on the handle. "All right, Naruto, you have to listen really carefully. Feel for the slightest disturbance, your reflexes will do the rest." The blindfolded boy just nodded as the muscles in his arms tensed in anticipation. He waited until he felt his father leave the clearing, noting how the wind died down completely. He was left with an eerie calm, his ears twitching ever so slightly as he listened out for even the most minuscule changes in the environment, sorting out the animals from the more unnatural sounds. Finally, Naruto spun on one foot, pivoting at the same moment he flicked out his kunai, letting it sail perfectly straight towards what he'd hoped was his target. He lifted up a corner of his blindfold to look at his father, holding the kunai he had thrown. With wide eyes he stared, realizing it was a few inches from his father's throat. His father coughed as he pulled the blade away, blinking slightly at his son's unerring accuracy. It was on par with an Uchiha. "That was good, Naruto. I think you have listening to your environment down." He looked down at the shining kunai again as he gulped, still a little startled that a kid not even in the academy had gotten so close to a vital spot. It was a good job he was the fastest man alive. He smiled a little, thinking that there was definitely no doubt that Naruto was his son. Although he did wish he had inherited his blonde hair, he could only hope for little Sukuru. "Your accuracy is spot on too." Naruto grinned broadly, jumping up and down in a little celebratory jig as his father chuckled. "But that's no excuse to get complacent. Remember to always keep training no matter what the circumstances are. If you aren't at your peak, then how are you supposed to protect your comrades?" He knelt down, pulling his son up onto his shoulders, much to the little redhead's delight. "Or your family?" Naruto just nodded determinedly, fire in his eyes as he made an internal promise to never stop training and to always protect the people closest to him. "Minato!" The blonde spun, unintentionally making his son giggle as he was thrown about atop his shoulders. He watched as his wife came staggering out into the garden, clutching her stomach as she wheezed. "Kushi-chan?" Kushina just continued to pant before she groaned suddenly, her knees bending a little as she quickly went through her breathing exercises. "She's coming, Minato." The man just blinked as he stood there, stock still, his mind shutting down. Thankfully, his son quickly knocked him on the head once, shocking him out of his daze as he suddenly flashed across the field so fast Naruto had to hold on or risk getting thrown off. "Oh, okay, we just need to call Bawako, right?" Kushina just nodded quickly between labored breaths as Minato hurriedly looked around, carefully setting Naruto down on the ground before disappearing into thin air. He returned a few moments later holding a flustered and slightly irritated Bawako. The woman took one look at the situation before gently placing a hand on Kushina's shoulder. Instantly, the woman relaxed as calming chakra began to flow through her system, allowing her to fall limply into Minato's arms with a lazy smile on her face. The blonde quickly began to carry his wife off, an enormous smile on his face before a small voice interrupted him. Tusan, what's going on?" Minato froze and quickly rushed back to his son's side, making sure not to disturb Kushina too much. "Don't worry about it, Naruto, everything's fine, just wait in the house." Naruto just nodded uncertainly as he looked between his smiling father and his now blissfully drugged mother. "Just think of this, Naruto, by the time I come back tonight." He looked down at the large bump under his wife's clothing. "You're going to have a little sister." Naruto smiled brightly at that, forgetting all the confusing things that had happened so far. Minato stood up, but not before tussling his son's hair, quickly making his way through the house as Naruto followed. The little redhead watched from a window as his father carried his mother away towards the safe house where she could give birth. For a moment he was confused that they weren't going to the hospital, but he didn't really understand all that much about where babies came from anyway, so he just shrugged. He looked around while grinning deviously. He had the house to himself for a few hours. Naruto was getting a little worried. He had finished training a few hours ago and had taken to just lazing around and raiding the fridge when he could. Now he was sitting by the window, looking out over the village as he waited for his parents to return with his new sister. He was excited as well. He was going to play with her loads and teach her lots of things like jutsu, as soon as he learned some, of course. He already had the substitution down. It was part of his father's speed training to see how many times he could substitute in a minute. Now, though it was getting late, it was well past his bedtime, not that he would ever admit to needing one. However, his eyelids were growing heavy. Yet, he wanted to be awake. He was eagerly awaiting for his new family to return home. Even so, his vision was getting a little cloudy and the couch he was lying on was getting increasingly comfortable. He didn't think it would matter much if he just closed his eyes for a few minutes. He was sure he'd have plenty of time before his parents got back. And then it happened. He suddenly jolted up on the couch, his eyes darting back and forth in panic as he listened to the sounds of screaming and destruction. Skin prickling, heart racing, he rushed to the window, only to see a sight that belonged in his childish nightmares. The village was burning. Plumes of fire towered to the sky, dwarfing familiar homes, thick black smoke smothering the thunderous clouds. Buildings lay in ruins, getting worse towards the edge of the village. And then he saw it. The enormous fox. Its warped form growling madly near the center of the village, its 9 long tails thrashing and snapping out behind it, flattening buildings with single sweeps. For a moment, when time seemed to come to a halt, Naruto could have sworn the enormous creature looked straight into his eyes. The boy stumbled backwards from the window, the fox continuing to destroy more of the village. Naruto turned from the window even as screams echoed, his hands clamping over his ears. He was alone. Where were his parents? He ran upstairs, his legs burning, his body shaking. He swallowed frightful breaths, wrenching his eyes shut, diving onto his parents' bed as he dug underneath the covers, snuggling tight into the gentle, lingering warmth they left behind. Suddenly, surreally, his father appeared. Looking around frantically, he called, until he spotted Naruto a lump in his bed. He quickly ran over, going down on one knee as he looked his son straight in the eyes. Naruto didn't know why he was wearing his Hokage coat. "Naruto, I really need you to be brave right now." The redhead nodded quickly as he stifled a sob, trying to pull himself into a more dignified position as his father gave him a weak but warm smile. "You need to come with me, there's something we have to do." Naruto nodded again, confused, but he could never turn down his father before, on anything. Minato smiled again as he pulled his son into his arms, lifting him up off the bed. "Tusan, where's Ka-san and Imudo?" Minato didn't say anything, but if Naruto had seen his face he would have noted the single tear that rolled down the usually unflappable Hokage's face. Both disappeared in an instant, reappearing only moments later to the louder screams of terrified civilians. The acrid stench of destruction and burning was full in Naruto's nostrils, and it made his eyes water. His father set him down on the roof they had arrived on. He looked around until his eyes landed on the fox. It was looking straight at him, its massive jaws pulled back in a snarl as it continued to swipe at the shinobi, attempting to stop it. He was about to scrabble backwards, away from the unbelievable aura of oppression and darkness the beast gave off. His father's words suddenly came back to him. He needed to be strong. He stood in trembling feet, watching as his father summoned Gamabunta down on the fox's head. Naruto was suddenly swept off his feet again as his father picked him up, all of them vanishing once again until he fell to the floor. He looked around again, immediately spotting the shock of red hair that could only belong to one other person. Ka-san. Kushina swept up her son into a hug even as a large altar poofed into existence behind them, summoned by Minato. The Ninetales was thrashing around violently, wondering where it had been taken now in its red haze of vision. Naruto, I love you, please be strong. Naruto sobbed again, not understanding what was happening. It was all going too fast for him. Ka-san, I don't understand. They both looked up as the enormous demon crashed its hand down on the ground, upsetting the earth and creating a massive cloud of dust. All he saw was his father standing there, his shirt blown open as he just stared at the enormous fox, bound by the chains erupting from his mother's back. He found himself being laid back in the altar, staring up into his mother's perfect purple's eyes. He saw the tears. They were swollen and red, but they looked down at him comfortingly. It's going to be okay, Naruto-chan. Everything's going to be okay. Naruto just nodded, his mind not working right as he tried to take comfort in his mother's eyes. Suddenly he felt a blinding pain like his insides were being set on fire. He screamed out, but his mother just held him tighter, pulling him into her chest as fresh tears spilled down her own cheeks. Naruto was breathing heavily, his breaths coming out in rasps as the pain continued to flow through his body, not even noticing the seal that began to write itself on his stomach. He opened his eyes, only to freeze in shock as he saw his mother standing over him, holding back the enormous claw of the beast. She gulped, tears streaming down her cheeks as she took one last look at her son. Naruto, she fell limp a moment later, her body falling to the ground in a growing pool of her own blood. Naruto could do nothing but stare in shock, frozen by fear and disbelief as he watched his mother's body draw its last breath, still looking into his eyes as they locked together one last time. He didn't even notice as the great beast dissolved in front of him, the energy rushing into his body that was already numbed. Seconds, or maybe hours trickled by as he just lay there, staring at his mother's body until a warm hand found its way onto his shoulder. He turned, almost mechanically, to look up at the pain-stricken face of his father, although he hid it well. Naruto looked down at the strange spiral seal on his father's stomach, not knowing an identical one now rested on his own. T2-san? Minato just smiled weakly at his son, already feeling his life slipping away and finding the words hard to speak. Know that we're proud of you, Naruto. We always will be. I wasn't fast enough. He coughed into his hand as he slumped down onto his knees, his body growing weaker. You have to be faster for me, okay, Naruto? Naruto just nodded his head in a stupor, a part of him not really believing that any of this was really happening. Minato's last action on this earth was to take off his coat and slowly wrap his son in it before his body slumped to the ground, lifeless. That was the scene Hiruzen finally emerged at, seeing the dead Hokage and his wife surrounding their shivering son who could do nothing but stare at the bodies of his lifeless parents. Hiruzen sighed sadly, knowing beforehand that this was a possibility as he made his way over to the shivering boy gently. He carefully picked Naruto up, sighing again as the small redhead just fell unconscious in his arms, everything finally catching up to him. The old Hokage stared down at the legacy of what was supposed to be his successor, a single tear in the corner of his eyes as he looked back at two of his dear friends. He had already lost so much tonight, his wife, his friends, but Naruto, he had lost everything. He walked away from the clearing, allowing the ANBU to do their jobs and quickly recover the fourth and Kushina's bodies. The village would require him to be strong right now. Naruto would need him to be strong. Rain pounded down on the ground relentlessly, but Naruto could barely feel it. His body was completely raw and numb as he stood there, staring down at the simple black memorial stone. The service wasn't long, but it was powerful. Everybody had gone by now. He was left alone, staring down at the 3 names inscribed in the stone, seeing his own face in the polished rock. He wasn't sure how long it was he was standing there before the Hokage finally put his hand down on his shoulder, but based on how soaked his clothes were, it was at least 10 minutes. "Come now, Naruto, you'll catch a cold if you stay out much longer." Naruto didn't reply. He didn't even move. His eyes just kept running across the same 3 names over and over. Hiruzen just sighed as he kept his hand on the boy's shoulders, knowing what he was going through. It would take time, but Naruto would recover. He would grow strong again and strive to make his parents proud. "You should go home, Naruto. The academy starts tomorrow. Your parents would have wanted you to go." Naruto just nodded lamely as he walked off, not even glancing back at the formerly retired Hokage. He trudged off through the pouring rain, his mind and body completely numb to everything around it. Even now his mind was stuck, reeling through those names, the names on that simple black memorial that would haunt his dreams. He walked through the streets, skirting around a large crater without really looking. His body was mostly working on instinct today, just going through the motions as he lamely made his way through the village to the academy. He was wearing one of his father's old tracksuits. He didn't know why he had picked it out specifically, but it was smooth and smelt of his father. His forever untamable hair spiked out around his head, and he ran a hand through it, remembering how his mother always tried to make it fall flat like her own. His hand fell back down to his side as he crossed the threshold of the academy, sliding round people like a ghost as he glided towards his classroom. He took a seat at the back, idly noting the faces of some of the other students as he moved past. Some were crying while others were consoling their friends to the best of their abilities. Most were shocked, but otherwise okay. He noticed a young raven-haired boy take a seat at the back on the other side of the class from him. He too was very quiet and reserved. He sat down, not really watching as the rest of the class slowly trundled in, no real haste to any of their movements. The QB attack had hit hard and fast. Nobody had escaped without some damage. Naruto looked down at his own stomach, knowing full well what he now contained within him, the very creature that took away the lives of his parents. He didn't know it, but his fingers were clenched hard on the table, his fingernails scoring through the wood with a noticeable shriek. It earned him some strange looks from the rest of the class, not that he particularly cared. Nobody sat next to him. He didn't know if it was because of who he was, what he contained, or just because of the vibe he was giving off. He was glad for the solitude. It let him think, although that probably wasn't for the best as his thoughts tended to drift towards the darker side nowadays. Finally, the last of the students took their seats as the sensei cleared his throat, starting off with a relatively boring lecture about how the attack on the village wouldn't weaken their will of fire or something like that. Naruto zoned out, only keeping a wary ear out for any useful information. He still hadn't forgotten the promise he had made to his father, the last promise he could ever make to his father. He was going to get stronger, he was going to get faster, he would protect those precious to him. He slumped down on the desk, earning a few more curious looks from his classmates as he closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping, he was just tuning out everything like his father had taught him, a form of mediation he had learned to augment his senjutsu training. He was rudely awoken from his semi-trance though when the door to the classroom burst open. All eyes turned to the door where a young girl of their age now lay on the floor, her momentum having carried her through the door too far. She picked herself up with a sheepish grin, straightening out her clothes, which looked very hastily thrown on, obviously in a hurry. Naruto only took a moment to look over her interesting purple hair and disheveled black shirt that looked way too big for her before slumping back down on the desk. He didn't realize that the seat next to his was the last available until the girl promptly sat down next to him, giving him a confused look before turning back to face the teacher. Within 5 minutes the girl was laid back on her chair, her tongue lolling out of her mouth as her eyes rolled back up into her head. Naruto had to look around, out of bemusement if nothing else, to see the overtly exaggerated display of boredom before returning to his comfortable position on his arms. He was listening to the lecture carefully, filing it all away in his mind if it proved useful, but it was becoming increasingly difficult with the girl next to him snoring in a loud and obnoxious manner. He tried to ignore it, but he found himself constantly looking up from his desk only to see the girl crack an eye open and smirk at him before returning to her annoying snores. She was hastily brought out of her fake sleep when the teacher threw his eraser clean across the room, slamming the girl right in the forehead. She tumbled back off her chair to painfully smack her head against the back wall, rubbing it painfully as she glared at the teacher. "What was that for?" The teacher's eye just twitched violently as he held up the clipboard higher so that she could see it. "Anko Midarashi." She just glared even harder at him. "Yes, sensei." The Chunin just glared at the girl a little longer, already knowing she would be a pain to teach. He sighed and looked down at the clipboard, his eyes opening a little wider as he read the next name. Naruto Namikaze. There were a few murmurs that spread around the room at the name before Naruto stood up, nodding his head to the teacher who nodded back respectfully. Naruto just sat back down, sighing and hoping that all his teachers wouldn't be like that. He wanted to learn, not get pampered. Anko sat back down in her chair, looking around the room at all the kids whispering while rubbing her sore head. She looked at Naruto, noting that he hadn't curled up in his little desk ball like before. "What's their problem?" Naruto raised an eyebrow as he looked at the students Anko was motioning to and sighed. "It's because of my name." Anko just stared some more, her own eyebrow quirking up at his cold tone as she looked back around. "So what? Means fish cake, right?" A visible tick appeared on Naruto's head as he tried unsuccessfully to ignore the girl again. "No, my surname." He turned to face her with a visibly irritated expression, and it means maelstrom. Anko just chuckled sweetly as she shook her head. "Whatever you say." "Fish cake." Naruto's eye twitched again as he blotted her out completely, returning to staring at his desk and listening solely to the lecture. "So what's up with Namikaze?" Anko turned but found Naruto to be ignoring her. It irked her a little, so she in turn turned and ignored him. She tried to think why Namikaze sounded so familiar, but it wouldn't come to her. She didn't really talk to kids her own age much, so wasn't well informed. Finally, the teacher dismissed them for lunch break, and everybody was surprised when a gust of wind seemed to blow through the class. When everybody looked back around, Naruto was gone, vanished in a red blur. Anko just blinked as she stared at the seat next to her, amazed by his speed. Another cog in her head refused to click as she tried to match the name Namikaze with unbelievable speed. In the end, she just shrugged and filtered out of the room with the rest of the class, making sure to send a dirty look the teacher's way. As soon as she was outside, she looked around for the elusive and speedy redhead, her eyes narrowing when she couldn't spot him. She hadn't got all that much sleep last night, so when she spotted a nice, unoccupied spot of grass, she happily flopped down on it, staring up at the birds flying across the bright blue sky. She blinked in amazement when she spotted just the boy she had been looking for, walking straight up the side of the academy towards the roof. Her body turned to stone, staring blankly at the impossible sight, wondering if she had hit her head harder than she had thought before. Was it something she ate? She picked herself up and rushed back into the building, taking the stairs up 3 at a time as she raced to the roof. When she finally burst out of the door, she saw Naruto sitting with his legs dangling over the edge of the roof, a small bento on his lap as he stared out over the gathered kids. Anko walked up behind him, trying to be stealthy as she carefully placed one foot after the other. "If you're trying to sneak up on me, you aren't doing a very good job." Anko mentally cursed, then paused, asking herself why she cared what he thought. "Wasn't trying to." Naruto just turned with a disinterested look on his face as he took her in again. "Then what were you trying to do?" Anko froze, unsure of what to say. For some reason she didn't want to say she had been looking for him for the sake of it. "How did you walk up the building?" Naruto glanced at her once before looking back out over the academy grounds. "With chakra." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, yet his voice held no arrogance, just a sort of tiredness. "Could you teach me?" Anko wasn't even sure where that had come from. It was almost on instinct. Naruto seemed to sense her incredulity as he turned again, looking at her with critical eyes. "Why?" I'm sure one of our sensei will teach it to us eventually. Anko just grinned as she walked over, sitting herself down next to the strange redhead she suddenly found so fascinating. Yeah, but if I can learn it now, then why not learn it now? Naruto hummed as he looked at her again. It sounded exactly like something his mother might say. It was ever so slightly petulant, but playful at the same time, like she already knew she had won the argument. I guess. I don't see why not. Anko grinned broadly, a bright smile that managed to ease some of the cold that had settled in Naruto's heart since his parents' deaths. For the first time in a week, the edges of Naruto's mouth managed to curl up ever so slightly into a ghost of a smile. Naruto almost couldn't believe he was doing this. He was sitting on a tree branch that overlooked a small clearing, silently staring. Anko was tumbling down the tree or blasting herself off it, chips of bark flying as she careened into the dirt below. Naruto remembered his own training to do just this a few months ago with his mother and dropped from the branch into a crouch before standing up and walking over. You're still putting too much chakra into it, he droned. Anko just huffed from her position lying on the floor. From here she could look straight up into Naruto's long face. She once again noted that his voice held no condescension or arrogance. He was just stating a fact. It was a little infuriating because it meant she couldn't criticize him, although that didn't stop her from trying. Her cheeks puffed. What's your point? She grumbled. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but his eyes showed no amusement at the statement. The purple-haired girl, who just couldn't understand him, glared, his stony tone bothering her. Naruto sighed again as he looked between her and the tree. The way his father taught him wasn't going to work here. He offered out a hand, and to his surprise, Anko took it, still out of breath from all her previous attempts. He pulled her up, the girl standing with a grunt. There was a brief pause as Naruto dwelled on his thoughts. Lie down next to the tree, he instructed. Anko looked at him questioningly, wondering why he had suddenly changed his method of teaching. Finally admitting you were wrong, she glowered. Naruto just gazed at her emotionlessly, making the girl take half a step back, her open palms rising up in placation. No, it's just people learn differently. It's obvious that the way my father taught me isn't going to work for you. Anko's lips came firmly together, slurring into a frown at that. She complied begrudgingly, lying down with her feet against the trunk. Now what? Naruto just motioned to the tree, staring at her with a slackened expression. Now apply an even layer of chakra to the soles of your feet and begin to take small steps upwards. If you feel yourself slipping, just adjust your control and try again. Anko nodded as her tongue suddenly emerged from her mouth. Naruto had noticed she did that whenever she was concentrating really hard. It was certainly different to her attitude in class. Anko began to slowly walk up the tree, using her hands to support herself on the ground until she felt confident enough to let go. She felt her grip loosening and quickly applied more chakra, only to have put too much in, forcing her to brace her hands to stay on. In a second, though, she got the right mix and held it as best she could, a small smile spreading over her features as she hesitantly took her hands off the ground. Hey fish cake, I'm doing it. Naruto twitched at the nickname but stayed quiet all the same, watching her as she slowly took one step, then another. He could see she was visibly straining her core muscles in order to stay horizontal, but some additional training and general growth would fix that. So, speaking of your dad, don't you have to get back home or something? Anko blinked when she didn't get a reply. Looking around, she saw that Naruto had vanished. Hey Naruto! She suddenly lost her grip on the tree and fell a good 3 feet to land squarely on her back with a small gasp. She got up unsteadily with a groan and looked around the clearing. Sure enough, Naruto had gone. The girl just blinked as she glanced around, now suddenly alone in the training ground. Something I said? The next day, Naruto was one of the first into class again. He sat down in the same spot again and quietly waited for the rest of the students to arrive. This time, though, he had a small scroll laid out on his desk, and every so often he would make a note of something. He continued to get strange looks from his young classmates, at least the ones who bothered to look his way anyway. To anyone else, it simply looked like he was doing homework, even though they hadn't been assigned any. He also noticed he wasn't the only one wrapped up in individual study. The same black-haired, pale-faced boy he had noticed yesterday was calmly reading through a scroll at the same desk. Naruto ignored him for now, just like he did everybody else. Except until Anko burst into the room, barely on time for class. It was hard not to pay attention to her. Somehow, she managed to look even more tired and disheveled than yesterday. She was wearing the exact same shirt. He was positive of that. She hadn't actually changed clothes since yesterday, familiar grass stains all over the back of it. Granted, he was wearing the same tracksuit as before, or at least of the same style. It turned out his father had a lot of them in his wardrobe. He shut his eyes for a moment. Going through his parents' room had brought up a lot of memories for him. He had broken down, crying for all of last night, for the first time since their deaths, the gripping visions vividly haunting his senses. He felt refreshed today, though, a lot better than he had before. He supposed he just needed to let out some emotions he didn't even know he had kept bottled up. He opened his eyes only to see Anko sitting next to him again, grinning happily as she stuck her tongue out at him. "I did it." Naruto raised an eyebrow while at the same time taking in Anko's appearance again. This close he could in fact confirm she had not changed her clothes since yesterday. She stunk of the forest and damp earth. "Did what?" Anko just blinked at him before sticking her tongue out childishly. The action was so unbefitting of somebody wanting to become a shinobi that Naruto nearly smiled at it. "I walked up the tree," she declared. Naruto just nodded slowly as he turned back to face the slightly flustered teacher that had just entered the class. "So you'll be eating with me again then?" Anko just nodded with a shit-eating grin that clearly told him she would. It caused him to sigh, yet at the same time, he couldn't fight the tingle in his cheeks. His self-imposed isolationism had already begun to get old, and he was warmed, yearning for the company. As strange as Anko was, it wasn't unpleasant to be with her. "Of course, Fishcake-sensei," she murmured with a goading smile. Naruto blinked at that but didn't turn, not allowing Anko to see the hint of a smile that quirked up his lips. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The redhead listened to what the teacher said while occasionally making notes of his own in his scroll. Anko was, well, Anko. She proceeded to piss of their teacher as much as physically possible, starting up cruel a game of Dodge the Eraser. The rest of the class, save a select few, seemed to find her antics just irritating, teacher included. One girl on one of the front benches laughed every time Anko would dodge the soft, chalk-stained projectile, which earned her a few harsh glares from the teacher at encouraging the purple menace's behavior. Naruto took a moment to look at her, long brunette hair that flowed down her back like a wave, pale skin, and the two red triangular markings on her cheeks that marked her as an Inuzuka. Minato, as Hokage, found it very important that Naruto be knowledgeable about all of the major clans in Konoha. It was important he didn't embarrass himself in a social situation, not that it mattered in the end. Other than that, the morning passed on without problem. Like clockwork, as soon as they were dismissed, he vanished from the room in a barely visible blur of red. When Anko chased him outside, she saw him scaling the side of the building, almost taking lazy steps to walk up without problem. Tentatively, she placed her feet on the wall, remembering everything the redhead had taught her yesterday as she slowly, but eagerly, scooted her way up the academy wall. The next day, Naruto was one of the first into class again. He sat down in the same spot again and quietly waited for the rest of the students to arrive. This time, though, he had a small scroll laid out on his desk, and every so often he would make a note of something. He continued to get strange looks from his young classmates, at least the ones who bothered to look his way anyway. To anyone else, it simply looked like he was doing homework, even though they hadn't been assigned any. He also noticed he wasn't the only one wrapped up in individual study. The same black-haired, pale-faced boy he had noticed yesterday was calmly reading through a scroll at the same desk. Naruto ignored him for now, just like he did everybody else. Except until Anko burst into the room, barely on time for class. It was hard not to pay attention to her. Somehow, she managed to look even more tired and disheveled than yesterday. She was wearing the exact same shirt. He was positive of that. She hadn't actually changed clothes since yesterday, familiar grass stains all over the back of it. Granted, he was wearing the same tracksuit as before, or at least of the same style. It turned out his father had a lot of them in his wardrobe. He shut his eyes for a moment. Going through his parents' room had brought up a lot of memories for him. He had broken down, crying for all of last night, for the first time since their deaths, the gripping visions vividly haunting his senses. He felt refreshed today, though, a lot better than he had before. He supposed he just needed to let out some emotions he didn't even know he had kept bottled up. He opened his eyes only to see Anko sitting next to him again, grinning happily as she stuck her tongue out at him. "I did it." Naruto raised an eyebrow while at the same time taking in Anko's appearance again. This close he could in fact confirm she had not changed her clothes since yesterday. She stunk of the forest and damp earth. "Did what?" Anko just blinked at him before sticking her tongue out childishly. The action was so unbefitting of somebody wanting to become a shinobi that Naruto nearly smiled at it. "I walked up the tree," she declared. Naruto just nodded slowly as he turned back to face the slightly flustered teacher that had just entered the class. "So you'll be eating with me again then?" Anko just nodded with a shit-eating grin that clearly told him she would. It caused him to sigh, yet at the same time, he couldn't fight the tingle in his cheeks. His self-imposed isolationism had already begun to get old, and he was warmed, yearning for the company. As strange as Anko was, it wasn't unpleasant to be with her. "Of course, Fishcake-sensei," she murmured with a goading smile. Naruto blinked at that but didn't turn, not allowing Anko to see the hint of a smile that quirked up his lips. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The redhead listened to what the teacher said while occasionally making notes of his own in his scroll. Anko was, well, Anko. She proceeded to piss of their teacher as much as physically possible, starting up cruel a game of Dodge the Eraser. The rest of the class, save a select few, seemed to find her antics just irritating, teacher included. One girl on one of the front benches laughed every time Anko would dodge the soft, chalk-stained projectile, which earned her a few harsh glares from the teacher at encouraging the purple menace's behavior. Naruto took a moment to look at her, long brunette hair that flowed down her back like a wave, pale skin, and the two red triangular markings on her cheeks that marked her as an Inuzuka. Minato, as Hokage, found it very important that Naruto be knowledgeable about all of the major clans in Konoha. It was important he didn't embarrass himself in a social situation, not that it mattered in the end. Other than that, the morning passed on without problem. Like clockwork, as soon as they were dismissed, he vanished from the room in a barely visible blur of red. When Anko chased him outside, she saw him scaling the side of the building, almost taking lazy steps to walk up without problem. Tentatively, she placed her feet on the wall, remembering everything the redhead had taught her yesterday as she slowly, but eagerly, scooted her way up the academy wall. A few kids stopped to watch her with amazement, but she ignored them, focusing on the chakra flowing to her feet, keeping it even as she made her way up. Finally, she was able to walk over the edge of the roof where a quiet Naruto was calmly eating from his bento. She was a little irritated that he didn't even mention the fact she had successfully walked up the wall, like it didn't matter. She sat down next to him in a huff, not even bothering to strike up a conversation as he just continued to eat. Naruto looked around, wondering why Anko hadn't started pestering him for something yet. He noticed she didn't have any lunch in front of her. Thinking she probably forgot it in her haste, he offered up his open bento to her. Anko just stared down at the offering for a moment, blinking in surprise at the kind action that had no apparent prompt to her. "Why?" Naruto gazed at her with inquisitive purple eyes. He was just doing what he thought was right. His mother had always stressed the importance of equality, while his father had always imposed the importance of working together. "I have food and you don't. It just seems like the right thing to do." Anko stared at him a moment longer before picking up one of the rice balls. She raised it to her lips but paused before she bit in. Naruto just looked at her with the smallest of smirks. "What? It's not poisoned or anything." Anko frowned and bit onto the rice ball, smiling as she enjoyed its home-cooked taste. She finished it quickly, much to Naruto's mutual shock and mild amusement, before licking her fingers clean. "Thanks for that," she mumbled. Naruto just nodded as he returned to his own meal. "No problem." The roof quickly returned to some semblance of silence. Why are you being nice to me when all I do is bug you? Naruto looked around. They had managed to stay quiet for almost 5 minutes before Anko finally spoke up again. What do you mean? Like I said, it's just what I think. Anko looked at him sternly, the look unbecoming, his red brows raising nervously in confusion at her. I mean, why do you even let me hang out with you? Why bother training me? I'm sure you had family to go home to yesterday. Wouldn't they be worried if you stayed out just because of me? Naruto went very quiet as he turned away from Anko, staring out over at the kids talking and playing or eating lunch down on the ground. My parents died in the Kyuubi attack. Anko went quiet as well, her mouth opening and closing rapidly without really knowing what to say. Her lips fumbled. I'm sorry, but Naruto raised a hand, waving off her apology quickly. Don't bother, it gets really sickening after a while. Having everybody's pity. He trailed off, you didn't know. So don't worry about it. He chuckled, a relatively humorless laugh, but it was better than anything else he had managed in the last few days. If he had been looking at himself then, he would have been amazed that he could even manage a laugh at this point. I don't know, having you around just makes it less lonely, I guess. He laughed dryly again as he turned, his hand rubbing the back of his head as he offered the first genuine smile Anko had seen so far, even if it was only small. I guess that sounds pretty sad, huh? Anko quickly shook her head, not wanting to upset Naruto any more than she already might have. He laughed again as he settled back on the roof, looking up at the sky with clearer eyes than he had for a while. He felt a tiny bit of that weight that settled over his chest lighten as he looked up. You managed to fill a silence pretty well. Anko smiled at that, until she got the hidden message and promptly punched Naruto in the arm. Ow. He said it fairly flatly, not having actually felt the punch compared to what his mother would dish out when he got especially cheeky. Anko just smiled that sickly sweet smile she could do, the one that looked innocent enough but was clearly a sign of her growing irritation. Naruto laughed it off, suddenly something he could do with relative ease again. Thanks for that. Anko turned, looking at the redhead curiously with a cocked brow. For punching you? Naruto nodded with the barest hints of a smile as he returned his gaze to the ground. Yeah, people have been treating me like glass ever since Ka-san and Tu-san died. I'm sick of it. At least you don't tiptoe around everything like I might break or something. He turned, his smile growing ever so slightly. It's refreshing. Anko nodded stiffly, looking down at her hands in thought, maintaining a neutral quirk in her lips, which Naruto didn't seem to mind at all. Any time. Naruto chuckled emptily again as he straightened up, feeling a lot better, at least until he caught somebody on the periphery of his senses. It's rude to eavesdrop on people you know. Anko just looked around curiously, wondering who Naruto was talking to. It was answered when a tall black-haired boy dropped down behind them, gazing at them almost as dispassionately as Naruto. Apologies, I didn't mean to intrude on anything. Naruto turned, noting that it was the same boy he kept noticing in the classroom, probably an Uchiha by his sharp eyes and even sharper hair. Hey, it's a free roof. The boy just smirked briefly as he sat down on the opposite side of Naruto to Anko. So it is. You're Naruto Namikaze, correct? Naruto just nodded, continuing to pick at his bento without much enthusiasm. My mother asked me to look out for you. He reached behind himself and pulled out a spare plastic container with a lunch in, holding it in front of her. Apparently she and your mother were friends. She asked me to give you this, but it appears you already have a lunch. He blinked suddenly as the food disappeared from his hands. I'll take that then, thank you. He blinked again, looking around at Anko, who now happily began to eat away at the free food before chuckling himself. Your friend is quite forward. Naruto smiled across at the black-haired boy. Tell me about it. That earned him an elbow in the ribs as Anko continued to happily tuck into the food. The new boy just stuck out his hand, which Naruto quickly took, never one to be rude thanks to both his parents' lessons. Itachi Uchiha. Naruto smiled and nodded as they shook. I thought as much. Itachi just nodded as he began to eat his own food, making Naruto curious as to why he wasn't eating with his own friends. He shrugged it off, though, as Itachi leant back, this time with his attention on Anko. I saw you scale the building, quite impressive. Who taught you how to do that? Anko grinned cheekily as she wrapped an arm around Naruto's shoulder, an action he didn't mind in the slightest, smirking. Fishcake Sensei, of course. The nickname, on the other hand, he could live without. He blanched. Itachi just smirked amusedly at the pair, chuckling to himself as he ate the rest of his meal quickly. I should have expected as much from a Namikaze, or an Uzumaki for that matter. Naruto smirked wide, in a challenging way. The boy raised himself to his feet. Anko, on the other hand, just seemed confused as she looked between the two. Am I missing something? What's so special about the name Namikaze? Itachi's flat expression morphed into one of disbelief. His brows raised high, wandering thoughts lingering on how she didn't seem to know the most obvious things. Then again, the Uchiha had always impressed the importance of knowing everybody who they deemed mattered in the village. Well, for one, they were a founding clan of the village, and secondly, it was the family name of our late fourth Hokage. Anko quickly spat out the rest of her mouthful over the edge of the building in surprise, unknowingly covering the teacher below them in half-chewed rice. You're the Hokage's son? She pointed a finger at Naruto as she blinked in shock. Naruto, on the other hand, just sighed as he gently brushed her almost accusatory hand to one side. Was the Hokage's son? He's dead, remember? His tone was a bit icier than usual, and Anko noticed, remembering back to when he had talked about people treating him differently. She chuckled sheepishly as she playfully punched him on the arm. Yeah, well, I could still beat you down. Both Naruto and Itachi shared a look in surprise at the sudden turnaround, but Naruto quickly smiled, a small sigh of relief passing through his mind. The three of them stayed up on the roof until their lunch break finally ended, quickly being herded in with the rest of the students. Naruto took his seat in class. He wasn't too surprised when Anko snagged a seat beside him. He did pause dramatically when Itachi took the other adjacent seat. He blinked in mild surprise, wondering when he started attracting people like a magnet. Class dragged on for another hour until the teacher finally stood up, smiling for once. Right. We're going to go out into the training field and have brief spars just to get an idea of where you're all at. That way we know what you need improvement on or we need to focus on more. We'll have sessions like these once a month until your full taijutsu lessons come into play next year. Of course, any students who have personal taijutsu styles from family or clans, and self-taught styles too, are fully welcome to use those times to study or practice. One kid on the second row put up his hand a little angrily. Hey, how is that fair that they get special taijutsu styles and the rest of us just get the academy-taught one? The teacher raised an eyebrow at this, clearly irritated by the question. There's a reason we teach this style of taijutsu at the academy. It is flexible. Many of the jounin you will see out in the village use the very style we teach here, tweaked of course to better suit their skills. However, if you must know one of the most powerful and highly praised taijutsu styles to come out of Konoha, the Goken, was created by a student no older than yourself, self-taught from scrolls in the library. You are more than welcome to try and replicate the feat if you are so inclined. The student quickly sat back down, now a little embarrassed as evidenced by his red face. All right, now if we all will come outside. All the students in the class suddenly braced for the sudden gust of wind they were expecting as Naruto exited the class. However, all looked around in bated breath to see him sitting still with his arms crossed over his chest. What? Everybody blinked simultaneously, some sharing a laugh. It was an amusing sight when they were all staring at the same boy. Naruto just followed along quietly as the class filed out of the building into the small training ground out the back of the academy. He sat on the farthest side of the bleachers, barely paying attention as various kids were called up to spar against one another. Most of the time it was pitiful at best, kids that didn't know the difference between throwing a punch and flailing an arm. Finally, he watched with some curiosity as Anko was finally called up to fight against the brown-haired girl he had observed earlier. They took their stances, and Naruto noted that Anko's form actually looked half decent even if the other girls seemed more honed, most likely due to the fact it had been tested out through countless battles with members of the Inuzuka clan. Anko offered up a cheeky smirk as she leaned back slightly on one foot, putting all her weight backwards. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the strange and risky tactic, wondering what it would accomplish. He got his answer as Hana shot forward. Typical of their style, she rushed in without really thinking about the consequences. Her speed was impressive, especially for a fresh academy student, but even so Anko seemed prepared. At what looked like the last possible moment, she managed to pivot on her back foot, swinging out of the way of the sloppy frontal assault. She quickly capitalized on her opponent underestimating her as she carried through with her momentum, completing her spin by bringing her elbow down on the Inuzuka's back. The girl was instantly floored, crumpling up onto the ground with a jolted groan. But she quickly recovered, rolling forward. She gracefully curled back up onto her feet with a determined look. Naruto was surprised by the seemingly uncoordinated yet efficient strategy that Anko achieved. Maybe he had been a bit quick when he so easily dismissed her hollow jibe at beating him. It continued in this strange manner for a minute or two. The girl would launch fast, but sloppy frontal attacks on Anko, who would counter without ever moving her weighted foot. Finally, the Inuzuka seemed to twig what her opponent was doing, and in a surprising display of tactics, she readjusted her attacks. Suddenly spinning to one side as she ran forward, she launched a leg forward past her crafty opponent, intent on sweeping out Anko's leg with a battle cry. The purple-haired girl just smirked as she used her other leg to swing up, using that momentum to carry through, flipping her body around and delivering a harsh but effective axe kick to the other girl's face. The Inuzuka went spinning out of the small ring the teachers had set up, dazed, while Anko casually strode out. The teachers failed to hide their slack-jawed, shifty-eyed gazes at one another. It was damn near unheard of for a civilian to defeat a clan heir in pure taijutsu, especially this early on in the academy. Naruto just found himself smiling as Anko strode over, plopping herself down next to him with a look that said, "Beat that." They had to wait another few matches, some more interesting than others, before Itachi's name was called up, followed by a civilian trainee. It was barely worth being called a fight. The boy just rushed the more stoic Uchiha, hoping to get in a lucky hit early on. Itachi simply waited for him to get close, diverted his barely coordinated punch away, and delivered a quick but brutal open-palmed strike into the boy's chest. Needless to say, the boy was sent flying out of the ring while Itachi walked back over to the stands to sit next to Naruto and Anko. Many of the teachers were a little disappointed, hoping to see a proper Uchiha fight, many now looking out for any decent candidates for Itachi to spar with next time. A few more fights later and Naruto was finally called up, apparently the last spar of the day. Surprisingly, his opponent was another Uchiha, a boy with short and unruly black hair called Shisui. They both entered the ring, settling back into their desired taijutsu stances, which made many of the teachers widen their eyes. A few of them blinked at Naruto, instantly recognizing his father's personal style, built around the Namake's legendary speed. Shisui just settled into the typical Uchiha interceptor stance as Naruto cocked his head to one side. "You know that style is much more effective with the Sharingan," Naruto stated clinically. Shisui offered small smile in return, not rising to the jibe. "I have to make do until it surfaces. Until then it has proven effective enough." Naruto just nodded with a small shrug as neither opponent moved, the inevitable problem arising when two taijutsu styles built around counterattacking meet. Naruto decided to get things moving, considering the only disadvantage he had with his style was that his body wasn't at its peak speed yet. He moved forward, pressing off his dominant leg as he flashed across the small arena in a blur of red. Many of the students and even some of the teachers were left speechless from the display of speed. Naruto quickly unleashed a small but efficient sweeping blow to Shisui's left side, hoping that it was the boy's weaker side. He was wrong though, and even without his Sharingan, the inherent reflexes honed by training allowed the Uchiha to divert the blow from his body before counter-attacking with a higher punch aimed at Naruto's head. The Namakes couldn't bite back a smile, finally allowing his style to come into its own. The whole concept of the taijutsu style was to be faster than your opponent, allowing you to first predict their attack, much like the interceptor style. However, unlike the Uchiha's patented style, his did not work by diverting attacks followed by counter-attacking. Instead, the idea was to attack while your opponent was still attacking, strangely more of an interception than its Sharingan-reliant counterpart. He demonstrated this quickly as he moved his body out of the way of Shirsui's precisely aimed, but too slow punch. He quickly brought his own arm up, landing 3 successive blows along the boy's arm at the wrist, elbow, and shoulder consecutively. While Shisui was caught off guard by the attack, he swung around, delivering a powerful kick faster than most could follow to the boy's chest. He was sent skidding back, but not quite out of the arena as a small smile appeared on the Uchiha's face. Impressive. Naruto just nodded politely. His opponent's style was also nothing to be laughed at, even if it wasn't complete. If he was any slower, the fight would be swinging the other way for sure, and there would be nothing he could do about it. Deciding to finish it quickly as not to be upstaged by Anko, he rushed forward, dissolving into a burr of red. He span mid-stride, looking as though he was going to deliver a spinning kick to Shirsui's chest again, only to suddenly drop down onto his back, spinning on the ground until he thrust upwards, catching the Uchiha in the chin. Shisui was finally sent flying out of the arena, not injured very badly, but that wasn't the point of the exercise, so Naruto didn't have to do any more. If the students watching weren't startled before then, they were now. Even a few of the teachers were quieted by the performance. Most were writing off Naruto as a genin already, easily, if his other skills matched his incredible taijutsu. That wasn't to say they weren't also impressed with Shisui, but without really seeing more of him fighting, they couldn't be sure of his skill level. Naruto walked over and offered a hand to the dark-haired boy, who smirked and took the offered hand, letting the redhead pull him to his feet. They were done for the day, so the teachers just let them leave, and Naruto was about to go home when a hand caught his shoulder. He spun, only to see the smiling face of Shisui staring at him kindly. "Hey, you want to train sometime? It's so hard to find a good sparring partner when everybody you train with has the same style." Naruto paused for a moment in surprise. He had never really been invited to do anything before. Sure, I guess." Shisui just smiled in response, and he waved goodbye to Naruto and walked off. "All right, I'll meet you at the Uchiha compound tomorrow night then?" Naruto just nodded lamely as Shisui ran off, Itachi in tow, as they both headed back to their homes. Naruto noticed the grounds had pretty much been vacated except for Anko, who stood off to one side, smirking at him deviously. "What?" Naruto gawked. Anko just shrugged innocently, her face turning into a mask of barely hidden amusement. "Nothing, just noticing for somebody so cold you seem to be attracting a lot of friends." Naruto just chuckled. She wasn't the only one who had been noticing. It seemed the more he wanted to be left alone, the more people seemed to flock to him. "I'm not that cold, am I?" Anko just chuckled as she moved closer, mischief glimmering in her eyes. "Of course not. Anyway, what's on tonight's agenda, Fishcake Sensei?" she whispered conspiratorially. Naruto grimaced at the still irritating nickname before his own curious lip graced his features. "And who do say you needs training? I saw you fight that Inuzuka. You've obviously been trained by somebody." Anko raised an eyebrow at the implication as she crossed her arm over her currently non-existent chest. "And what if it's all self-taught?" There was a chuckle from Naruto, genuinely this time. "Then I think I should be the one asking for training." Anko just snorted, her harsh attitude melting as quickly as it had formed as she uncrossed her arms again. "As if you have all those fancy family moves." Naruto just shrugged, neither agreeing nor disagreeing completely, as he began to walk off in the direction of his home. "Oh, are you going home already?" Naruto turned with a slightly bemused expression. Yeah. Why? Aren't you?" Anko seemed nervous about something, even if she was trying to hide it well. Her hands were fidgeting behind her as she looked away from him. "Oh, sure." She made a turn to leave and Naruto grimaced, getting the idea that she didn't really want to go home at all. He fought with it for a moment as Anko continued to walk away, far too slowly to be at all eager about where she was going. "Hey Anko, do you want to go and get something to eat or something?" Anko spun on a heel, obvious surprise on her face as she looked at Naruto, taking in his slightly concerned expression. Okay. She quickly hurried back over, but for good measure punched him in the arm lightly. If you insist, I mean geez. Naruto chuckled, but it didn't stop his eyes from furrowing into a frown as he led Anko away from the academy. She would talk about inane things as they walked, but even so he still caught the signs of nervousness that slowly eased the more they talked.